The panic within the Cairo palace was palpable. 4 emissaries stood before the Sultan, bearing an ultimatum that had already leveled 100 cities: surrender or be erased. While his advisors whispered of capitulation, the Sultan chose defiance. The envoys were executed, and their heads were displayed atop the city walls. To the outside world, he had just signed Cairo's death warrant. In reality, he had set the stage for one of the most consequential religious clashes in human history. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. In this video, we will discuss the Battle of Ain Jalut, Islam's final defense against the invincible apocalyptic war machine of the Mongol Empire. Historical legitimacy is often bought with blood, but rarely is that blood shed by those meant to protect it. We've seen Rome's legions turn on their emperors and the Praetorian Guard auction off the world's most powerful throne. But in the 13th century, a group of men who were legally property became the protectors of their faith. To understand how the fate of a religion ended up in the hands of former slaves, let's begin with 6th century Arabia and the rise of Islam. Following the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632, his followers initiated a meteoric rise that redefined the maps of antiquity. In just 30 years, the Islamic Caliphate dismantled the Persian Empire and stripped Byzantium of its wealthiest provinces. By the early 8th century, the Islamic domain spanned from the mountains of Afghanistan to the Atlantic cliffs of Iberia. As the centuries turned, conquest gave way to the Islamic Golden Age. The Abbasid caliphs traded their swords for pens, turning Baghdad into the world's intellectual heart. But while their minds became sharp, their swords became dull. By the 12th century, the Muslim world was vulnerable, fractured and under constant threat of crusading Christians in the Levant. But the legendary general Saladin overthrew Abbasid's rival Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, founding the Ayyubid dynasty, with eyes toward greater Muslim unity. To unify the region, Saladin expanded a practice initiated in the 9th century and used by his Fatimid predecessors, outsourcing his army to non-Muslim captives. Since Islamic law forbade the enslavement of other Muslims, the Ayyubids looked outward, primarily toward the pagan and Christian tribes of the Turkic steppe, to build a professional cavalry. These captives were isolated and converted to Islam during their training regimen, creating an elite force that owed its life and loyalty solely to the Sultan. They were known as the Mamluks, meaning ones who are owned. The Mamluks were transformed into one of the most elite cavalry forces on the planet, but the Ayyubids had trained a wolf without protecting their sheep. In 1249, during the height of the Seventh Crusade, the Ayyubid Sultan, As-Salih Ayyub, died of an infection. Seeing their opportunity, the Bariya Mamluks, the most elite of the slave regiment, assassinated the Sultan's son and heir, Turan Shah, ending the Ayyubid line in Egypt. Their commander, Aibeg, then married the former Sultan's widow, Shajar al-Dur, marrying into the throne. And in 1250, the Mamluks had transformed from the property of the state into its masters, becoming the new battle-hardened protectorates of Islam. But with great power comes great responsibility. And if the spread of Islam could be described as meteoric, then a new threat stretching from the east could only be described as otherworldly. From the vast Asian steppe, a new force had emerged as a machine of total war. In just 2 decades, Chinggis Khan and the Mongols had erased borders from the Pacific to the Caspian, systematically dissolving every dissenting civilization in their path. During his lifetime, Chinggis Khan shattered the Western Xia and Jin dynasties in China, crushed the Khitans in Central Asia, and dismantled the Khwarezmian Persians, while dealing crippling blows to the Georgians, Armenians, and Volga Bulgars. When Chinggis Khan died in 1227, his sons and his legendary general Subutai picked up right where he left off. By 1240, they had destroyed the Kievan Rus. By 1258, they had sacked Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate and effectively slamming the door on the Islamic Golden Age. And by 1260, they had finished off the remnants of the Ayyubids by besieging and sacking Aleppo and Damascus. The Mongols were effectively undefeated in every major field engagement they had ever initiated, and they had achieved this through a terrifying methodology of surrender or solitude. The Mongols took resistance as an insult. If a city closed its gates, they didn't just conquer it, they erased it, dismantling the irrigation systems and social structures that allowed life to exist, ensuring the punishment lasted for generations. As Chinggis Khan himself famously proclaimed to the elites of Bukhara, he was the punishment of God sent to collect a debt for their sins. Now, this invincible machine stood on the doorstep of the Nile, and the stakes had transcended mere conquest. The fall of Baghdad hadn't just been a military defeat, it had decapitated the faith by murdering the caliph. For the Mamluks, this was no longer a border dispute. It was an existential struggle for the survival of Islam itself. The threat was compounded by the inner circle of the Mongol command. The leader of the campaign, Hulagu Khan, grandson of Chinggis, and brother of Mungka, the Great Khan, had surrounded himself with Christian advisors, including his lead general, Kitbuka Noyan, a Nestorian Christian who may have viewed this expansion as a holy war against the Islamic world. There was truly nowhere left to retreat. The Mamluks were the final defense. In the summer of 1260, the palpable tension in the Cairo palace was shattered by the arrival of Mongol envoys. They carried the same binary ultimatum that had leveled every major city from Peking to Damascus for 50 years: surrender or be erased. For Mamluk commanders, many of whom had seen the Mongol wreckage firsthand, the choice was clear: capitulate and survive. But Sultan Saif ad-Din Qutuz had a different vision. He had the envoys executed, reportedly sliced in half at the waist, and their heads displayed atop the Bab Zuwayla Gate. The Sultan had crossed the Rubicon. Predictably, this enraged Hulagu Khan, who began preparing a force of roughly 60,000 for a total invasion of Egypt. Qutuz was staring down a 3-1 disadvantage, leading a force of only roughly 25,000. To survive, he had to call upon his most dangerous rival, Baibars, a brilliant and ruthless military commander who had previously fled Egypt after a power struggle. In the face of this existential threat, the frenemies united. Then, in a stroke of impossible luck, news arrived. Mungka, the great Khan, was dead, requiring all princes to return to the homeland and elect a successor. Hulagu was forced to withdraw the vast majority of his invincible army, leaving his general Kitbuka with a vastly reduced force of just 1 tumen, roughly 10,000 soldiers and local conscripts. In September 1260, Qutuz and Baibars seized this opportunity. They mobilized a force of roughly 15,000 elite cavalry. As they marched toward the valley of Jezreel, aided by safe passage and logistical support from the Crusaders in Acre along the way, the Mamluks had 2 tricks up their sleeve. First, they had an intimate knowledge of the Levantine terrain. Second, they weren't just trained to fight steppe warriors, they were steppe warriors. The 2 forces finally collided at Ain Jalut, meaning Spring of Goliath, near the foot of Mount Gilboa in the Galilee. The Mongols believed they had a numerical advantage, but their flawed intelligence missed the bulk of the Mamluk army above the ridgeline, hidden in the dense surrounding forest, leaving only a small vanguard visible on the valley floor. Baibars took the lead, engaging the Mongols in a brutal high-speed skirmish. Using a Mongol tactic, he began a feigned retreat, pulling his lines back to maintain the illusion of a rout, and Kitbuka took the bait. He ordered a charge deep into the valley, where Qutuz's hidden forces thundered down from the heights, and for the first time in history, the Mongols were the hunted. Despite the trap, the fighting was agonizingly intense, and Kitbuka's heavy cavalry still nearly shattered the Mamluks' left flank. As the line began to buckle, Qutuz, seeing the fate of Islam teetering on a knife's edge, legendarily tore off his helmet and yelled, "O Islam! O Allah! Help your servant Qutuz against the Mongols!" This reinvigorated the Mamluks, who surged forward in a brutal hours-long melee until they achieved the impossible. They surrounded the Mongol corps, capturing Kitbuka himself. Seeing their general taken, the remaining Mongol forces broke and retreated toward Beit Sha'an, but the Mamluks mercilessly pursued them, dismantling the invincible army. The Muslims had won the day. Enjoying so far? Give us a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps this kind of content coming. In many ways, Ain Jalut was not a crushing destruction of Mongol power, but a symbolic rupture. The Mongol force was only a fraction of the army that had toppled empires, and under different circumstances, there is little doubt that Hulagu would have returned with overwhelming strength to finish the job. But by the time that became possible, the illusion of Mongol invincibility had already shattered. For decades, their advance had felt apocalyptic. Now, the world saw that they could bleed, and more, lose, and a long-held breath was released. But while the psychological impact of the battle was immediate, the political shifts that followed were far more concrete. Just weeks after the victory, Sultan Qutuz was assassinated, widely attributed to Baibars, who, in addition to previous qualms, had also been denied governorship in Aleppo. Rather than plunging the Mamluks into instability, Baibars consolidated power quickly, establishing himself as the undisputed head of a now battle-tested regime. To reinforce that authority, he installed Al-Mustansir II as a ceremonial Abbasid caliph in Cairo, restoring, if only symbolically, the institution that had been destroyed in Baghdad. In doing so, Cairo emerged not just as a political capital, but as the uncontested center of the Islamic world. And yet, the true reason Hulagu never returned may lie beyond the battlefield. The death of Manka Khan didn't just interrupt the campaign, it shattered the Mongol world. A succession crisis spiraled into the Toluid Civil War, accelerating the division of the Eurasian Mongol power. No longer facing a unified force, the Mamluks could now navigate a world of competing khanates. Most notably, they found a partner in the Golden Horde, whose ruler, Birka, had converted to Islam and entered into open conflict with his cousin Hulagu over territory and the sacking of Baghdad. This created a second front that further constrained any renewed Mongol push into the Middle East. What had once been an unstoppable wave was now divided, redirected, and, for the first time, containable. Most historians believe that if Hulagu's full force had reached Cairo, the Mamluks would be little more than a footnote, just another city erased for the crime of Mongol descent. But in one of history's most miraculous instances of deus ex machina, Munka's death swooped in at the 11th hour, leaving Qutuz and Baibars to face a skeleton crew. This cosmic fluke shifted the gravity of the Mediterranean and preserved the political heart of Islam. However, a different school of historical thought suggests that the Mongols were hitting a natural wall regardless of the great Khan's death. The Mongol machine was built on the backs of hundreds of thousands of horses, each warrior traveling with supposedly 3 to 6 or even up to 10 mounts to maintain their legendary mobility. This required the endless pastures of the Eurasian steppe. But the arid and restricted climate and geography of the Levant and Egypt offered no such support. To push further, the Mongols would have been forced to drastically downsize their cavalry or abandon their mobile style of warfare entirely. In this light, the force at Ain Jalut was environmentally restricted by the land itself, resulting in a diminished Mongolian force regardless of the funeral in Karakorum in Mongolia. Regardless, the ensuing battle led to a more complicated reality behind what is often seen as Islam's last stand. While the Mamluks likely saw the battle existentially, historians also remain divided on just how decisive it was for the survival of the religion itself. Islam as a faith was not on the verge of extinction. Millions lived under Mongol rule in Persia, and figures like Birka Khan had already embraced it, but Islam's political and religious centrality was a different question. With Baghdad gone, Egypt stood as the last major center of Islamic defense. Had it fallen, Islam may have continued to exist widely, but without a dominant political core as its anchor. Instead of existing as powerful states, it may have evolved more as a decentralized religion practiced across competing empires, not erased, but fundamentally reshaped. In that light, Ain Jalut sits in a category of battles similar to the Byzantine defeat at Manzikert, in which its importance lies not just in what happened on the field, but in what it catalyzed. External factors, the death of the great Khan, the fragmentation of Mongol authority, and the subsequent emergence of rival khanates, were already reshaping the world. But at Ain Jalut, those factors converged. As a result, the Mongols were no longer seen as inevitable, and the Islamic world was not only preserved, but given the space to reassert itself. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.